The European Parliament voted to adopt the EU-US deal struck last summer by US President and European Commission President.
Qatar says it expects the framework agreement between the United States and Iran to be signed in Geneva on Friday. Almost 2.4 million refugees will need resettling next year, the United Nations said on Tuesday.
The European Parliament voted on Tuesday to adopt the EU-US deal struck last summer by US President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Turnberry. The final green light needed to implement the agreement comes as Trump threatened on Monday to impose tariffs on French wine and champagne if Paris did not remove its digital tax on US big tech. The vote allows the EU to remove its duties on most US industrial goods, while Europeans commit to paying 15% US tariffs on goods exported to the United States. Since Trump has shown that he is willing to use tariffs as a coercive tool against European partners on issues unrelated to trade, EU lawmakers sought to introduce safeguards into the agreement to shield it from future pressure from the US administration. A sunset clause was introduced into the final agreement to end the trade deal on the 31st of March 2029, at which point Trump's term will be over unless it is renewed. MEPs also secured a provision allowing the Commission to suspend the trade agreement at the request of either Parliament or a member state if the US fails to lift tariffs on European steel and aluminium by the end of 2026.
The European Parliament has rejected cuts proposed in the draft of the EU long-term budget for the period 2028 and 2034. The Cypriot government presented a compromise text last week with the cuts of almost 33 billion euros to the bloc's budget. According to Parliament, the proposed cuts weaken an already inadequate budget.
Cypriot Council Presidency proposes to cut 1/3 of the allocation to agriculture and 1/4 of the allocation to cohesion. We as a Parliament strongly reject these cuts. We strongly reject the fact that the Council proposes a very, very low level, even below the already too low level proposed by the Commission to agriculture and cohesion.
In its proposal, the European Parliament requested a 10% increase in the budget. The negotiations began in July 2025 when the European Commission published its €2 trillion budget proposal. The Commission has outlined three main spending priorities: the Competitiveness Fund, Global Europe and Horizon funds. EU leaders will discuss the long-term budget in Brussels this week.
Inflation, surge of energy prices, European citizens are paying a high price for the US and Israel's war against Iran, Spanish MEP Javier Moreno Sanchez told Euronews. Moreno welcomed the tentative agreement reached on Monday between the US and Iran to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
It's a good news because United States and Israel are making the war, and we are paying for the war. The citizens, the European citizens, are paying for this war with inflation, with the price of oil, of energy, and it's important now to stop this war. It's a nonsense. It's not a win-win game. Everybody is losing in this war.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has opposed US President Donald Trump over the war in Iran. The Spanish head of government has refused to allow US forces to use Spanish military bases or its airspace and accused the US and Israel of breaching international law.
This war, let me come back to the beginning, was an illegal war and a nonsense because, and we oppose, as Social Democrats and Socialists, we oppose to this war. President Pedro Sánchez opposed to this war because what was the purpose of this war? It was to bring back the democracy, to stop the nuclear program of Iran, and what is the result?
Significant barriers to a long-lasting end of the conflict remain. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday Israel would not withdraw from the land seized in southern Lebanon, where it is fighting the Hezbollah, while Iran said Tuesday that the end of the conflict included the end of Israel's occupation of Lebanon.
Qatar says it expects the framework agreement between the United States and Iran to be signed in Geneva on Friday, with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz forming part of the deal. But Foreign Ministry spokesperson Dr. Majd al-Ansari cautioned that the region would not simply return to business as usual after months of conflict, saying rebuilding trust and establishing a new regional security framework would take time.
We are cautiously optimistic that the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding will lead to a next phase of regional security. These are issues that have plagued the region for decades. They will not be resolved in mere days.
Al-Ansari said the memorandum is expected to restore normal navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, allowing Qatar to resume LNG exports and easing pressure on global energy markets.
We are confident that, as reported, the MOU will reopen the strait for normal navigation, and that would allow countries like Qatar to again be supplying energy to the world.
Qatar says the agreement is an important first step, but that much work still lies ahead. With a signing ceremony expected in Geneva and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz forming part of the framework, attention is now turning to implementation and whether the current momentum can be translated into lasting stability across the region. Mohammed Al-Ashi, Euronews, Doha.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday at the G7 summit that he is not happy with Israel's conduct in Lebanon in their operations against the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. He said Hezbollah remains a problem for the region, but suggested that Israel's response had gone too far and could jeopardize stability in the Middle East.
I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. And I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it.
Trump's comments come as the U.S. and Iran are preparing to sign a framework deal to end the war, which Iran said on Tuesday hinges on Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, a condition Israel has already rejected and that could potentially sink the agreement.
Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
A U.S. official familiar with the outlines of the agreement has said the deal did not call for an Israeli withdrawal. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that Israel would remain in Lebanon as long as necessary.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that he hopes to bring the war to an end before next winter or secure a ceasefire, warning that Vladimir Putin is deliberately avoiding direct talks. Speaking at the G7 summit in France, Zelensky confirmed he asked United States President Donald Trump for the transfer of licenses to manufacture Patriot air defense systems domestically. The US leader responded positively, Zelensky said. Kyiv is prioritizing anti-ballistic production as the war in the Middle East has depleted nearly one-third of global Patriot interceptor stockpiles, leaving Ukraine vulnerable to missile strikes. But Ukraine has mastered drone countering expertise, maintaining a 90% interception rate using domestic technology. This expertise has turned Ukraine into an air defense provider, with Zelensky announcing that Kyiv is now finalizing a major drone production deal with Canada to expand security cooperation.
Almost 2.4 million refugees will need to be resettled next year, the United Nations said on Tuesday, at a time when numerous countries, such as the United States, have slashed refugee admissions. The UN Refugee Agency warned of a shortage of options for refugees who cannot return home because of war, violence and persecution and face risks in their country of asylum. The UNHCR urged to expand resettlement, increase refugees' quotas and accelerate processing. 2.37 million people from 43 countries of origin and living in 76 countries of asylum would need resettling elsewhere next year, according to a UNHCR's annual report. Afghan refugees are the largest group in need of resettlement. They are followed by people from South Sudan, Sudan and Syria, as well as Rohingya refugees from Myanmar living in vast camps in Bangladesh. The number of refugees who need to be resettled is down 6% from last year's report. It was partially due to Afghans returning from Iran and Pakistan under adverse circumstances and voluntary returns to Syria following the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in December 2024.
The WHO has warned that Europe needs to do more to battle deaths from heat-related causes, with more than 200,000 people dying in the last 4 years alone. The extreme heat has directly led to a rise in heat-related illnesses and premature deaths, all of which were preventable according to the World Health Organization. Europe is among the regions of the world most severely affected by global warming, the WHO warned. Most premature deaths due to extreme heat have occurred in Italy, followed by Spain, Germany and Greece. Rising global temperatures, rapid urbanization and demographic aging are converging to increase both exposure to heat and vulnerability to its effects. Together, these trends are driving a growing and unevenly distributed burden of heat-related illness and death and underscore the need for effective prevention, the WHO warned. In its recommendations, the WHO suggested a broad range of measures, from greening cities for more shade and creating networks of cooling centers to social services making sure older people stay hydrated.